Hey guys, it's Andrew, and in this video, I'll be going over some tips that will help you sound more natural and less like a textbook as you begin to make the switch from Spanish to Portuguese. If you're interested in learning Portuguese more efficiently by leveraging your Spanish, make sure to hit the subscribe button and click on the bell to be notified every time I post a video. After 20 years of immersing myself in the Portuguese language, one thing I've learned is that the way Brazilians speak it in casual, everyday conversations is very different from the way that it's taught in most textbooks. And that's because the spoken language in Brazil has evolved and diverged so much from the formal written language that when you're learning Brazilian Portuguese, it can feel as though you're trying to juggle two different languages at the same time. The first tip is to not use the future tense when speaking. The future tense is hardly ever used in casual speech and is instead expressed with the present tense of the verb ir, meaning to go, plus the infinitive. So for example, I will learn would be vou aprender, which as you can see is really similar to voy a aprender in Spanish. In this tweet that Giselle sent Neymar, she says, vou estar torcendo por você e pelo nosso Brasil. I'll be rooting for you and for our Brazil. So instead of using the future tense and saying estarei, which would be formal, she uses the informal vou estar. Literally, I'm going to be rooting for you. Notice how similar this is to voy a estar in Spanish, only that in Portuguese, you don't have the preposition a between the verbs. Tip number 2 is that the conditional tense is often expressed with the imperfect in casual speech. The conditional tense can sound a bit more formal in Brazilian Portuguese, so there's a tendency in the spoken language to replace it with the imperfect, or the imperfect of the verb ir plus the infinitive. So instead of saying, ele disse que trabalharia comigo, ele dijo que trabajaria conmigo, people tend to say, ele disse que trabalhava comigo. Trabalhava being like trabajaba in Spanish. Or, ele disse que ia trabalhar comigo. Ia trabalhar is literally like iba a trabajar in Spanish. In Anderson Silva's tweet here, he thanks his family for having faith that one day everything would get better. Que dia tudo ia melhorar. So instead of using the conditional tense and saying melhoraría or mejoraría in Spanish, he expresses the conditional with the imperfect of ir plus the infinitive, ia melhorar, which literally would be like saying was going to get better or iba a mejorar in Spanish. If you're just beginning your Portuguese language learning journey, let me know what you find to be the most difficult thing about making the switch from Spanish to Portuguese. Tip number 3 is that in the third person, subject pronouns usually replace direct object pronouns in casual speech. So what do I mean by that? Let's take a look at the direct object pronouns in the third person. U, a, us, as, which in Spanish would be lo, la, los, las. And then the subject pronouns are ele, ela, eles, elas, which is like él, ella, ellos, ellas. In formal written Portuguese, the way you say I saw him is eu o vi, which is like yo lo vi in Spanish. Most Portuguese textbooks are going to teach you how to say it this way, but in actual everyday speech, this sounds really formal, and so most Brazilians use the subject pronoun instead of the direct object pronoun and place it after the verb like you see on the right. Eu vi ele. This is like if you were to say yo vi él in Spanish instead of yo lo vi. Another example of this is eu conheço ela instead of eu a conheço to say I know her, or yo la conozco in Spanish. Now the spoken version on the right is technically considered incorrect grammar, so you won't see it written this way in like a magazine article, but it represents the reality of how the language is spoken in everyday, casual situations. The fourth tip is to use a gente instead of nós in casual speech to mean we or us. So in Portuguese, you have two ways to say we. Nós, which is the more formal way of saying it, and then a gente, which is what you're much more likely to hear in everyday situations. The conjugations for nos are really similar to the nosotros form in Spanish. For example, nosotros cantamos in Portuguese would be nós cantamos, nosotros comemos, nós comemos, nosotros abrimos, nós abrimos. But since nós does sound more formal, in everyday speech, Brazilians usually just use the colloquial form a gente, literally the people or la gente in Spanish, which takes on the third person singular when conjugating verbs. So instead of nós cantamos, you would say a gente canta to express we sing. Instead of nós comemos, you would say a gente come to mean we eat. A gente abre replaces nós abrimos, and so on.
A gente trabalha o ano inteiro.
That was a clip of João Gilberto singing the bossa nova classic A Felicidade. He says, a gente trabalha o ano inteiro. We work the entire year. A gente trabalha literally in Spanish would be like saying la gente trabaja. But used in this way to mean we, it really means trabajamos el año entero, or we work the entire year. Tip number 5 is that the es in está is dropped in casual speech. Portuguese also has the verbs ser and estar, and they're used for the most part in the same way as in Spanish. The one thing to know for spoken Portuguese is that the es in all forms of estar are almost never pronounced. So I'm learning Portuguese, estou aprendendo português becomes tô aprendendo português. Ele estava estudando becomes ele estava estudando, and so forth. So if you're watching Brazilians teaching Portuguese on YouTube, they'll usually clearly pronounce the es just to make it easier for you to understand. But just know that in the real world, people usually drop it. And the 6th tip is to ignore li and lis in conversation. Li and lis are the third person indirect object pronouns in Portuguese, which are the equivalent of le and les in Spanish. Except for in certain regions in Brazil, they're not used much in the spoken language, so you can pretty much ignore them. To illustrate what you would say instead of li and lis in conversational Portuguese, let's take a look at a sentence in Spanish. Marco le dio un libro. Marco gave him a book. Now in formal Portuguese, this would be Marco lhe deu un livro, which is how some Portuguese language learning textbooks would teach it. But in everyday spoken Portuguese, most Brazilians would say Marco deu un livro pra ele. Literally, Marco gave a book for him, or Marco dio un libro para él. So anytime where you would say le or les in Spanish, instead of using li and lis in Portuguese, you're usually going to use this construction with pra. So these tips barely scratch the surface, but I hope that this video has begun to open your eyes and given you a greater appreciation for just how different everyday spoken Brazilian Portuguese is from the textbook Portuguese that a lot of foreigners learn. I'll be delving a lot deeper into this topic in future videos, but if you'd like to have a playbook that walks you through your first conversations in Portuguese as you make the switch from Spanish, then click on the link in the description to download my guide, Your First Conversations in Portuguese. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Muito obrigado e até a próxima. Tchau.